Captain Sarah Chen walked through the military base like any other day. Her uniform looked perfect, her boots polished to a mirror shine. But something was different about today. The other soldiers barely glanced at her as she passed by. They saw what they expected to see. Just another support officer doing paperwork and managing supplies. Sarah had been hiding her true identity for months. The year was 1943, and women weren't supposed to be flying combat missions. The military had strict rules about keeping female pilots away from the front lines. But Sarah had other plans. She had trained secretly for years, learning everything about fighter jets that the male pilots knew. Her father had been a pilot in the First World War. He taught her to fly when she was just 16 years old. Every weekend, they would sneak out to the old airfield where he kept his small plane. Sarah learned to handle the controls like she was born for it. Her father always said she had natural talent that most men could only dream of. When the war started, Sarah tried to join the combat pilots. The officers laughed at her application. They told her that women belonged in hospitals or offices, not in cockpits fighting enemies. This made Sarah angry, but she didn't give up. Instead, she found another way. She got a job as a communications officer at the air base. During the day, she would handle radio calls and file reports. But at night, when everyone else was sleeping, Sarah would sneak into the hangar. She studied every part of the fighter jets. She memorized the controls, the weapon systems, and the flight patterns. The mechanics who worked late shifts became her friends. They taught her about engines and repairs. Sarah also made friends with some of the male pilots. During their breaks, she would ask them questions about their missions. She learned about enemy tactics, dangerous weather patterns, and combat strategies. The pilots enjoyed talking to someone who truly understood their work. They had no idea they were training their future wingman. One mechanic named Tom discovered Sarah's secret late one night. He found her sitting in the cockpit of a fighter jet, going through pre-flight checks like a professional. Instead of reporting her, Tom was impressed. He had never seen anyone pick up flying skills so quickly. From that night on, Tom became Sarah's secret ally. Tom would let Sarah practice with the planes during maintenance hours. He taught her advanced repair techniques and shared stories from his 20 years of working with military aircraft. Tom had served in different wars and knew that courage wasn't limited by gender. He believed Sarah deserved a chance to prove herself. The base commander, Colonel Williams, was known for his strict rules about women in combat roles. He believed that having female pilots would distract the male soldiers and put everyone in danger. Sarah knew that convincing him would be impossible through normal channels. She needed to find a different approach. Sarah spent her free time studying enemy aircraft and their weaknesses. She read intelligence reports and analyzed battle patterns. Soon, she knew more about enemy tactics than some of the experienced pilots on the base. Her knowledge would prove invaluable in the coming days. The other female officers on the base admired Sarah's dedication to her work. They thought she was just very committed to her communications job. None of them suspected that she was preparing for something much more dangerous. Sarah kept her flying dreams to herself, sharing her plans only with Tom. As weeks passed, Sarah's confidence grew. She had mastered the controls of 3 different types of fighter aircraft. Her shooting accuracy during secret practice sessions was better than most of the official pilots. She felt ready for real combat, but the opportunity seemed impossible to find. The base received reports of increased enemy activity in their sector. More missions were being planned, and the pilots were getting nervous. Everyone knew that the next few weeks would be crucial for their defense efforts. Sarah felt that her time to prove herself was coming soon. Late one evening, Sarah overheard a conversation between 2 senior officers. They were discussing a shortage of available pilots for an important upcoming mission. Several regular pilots were injured or sick. The base was running short on experienced combat flyers just when they needed them most. This was the moment Sarah had been preparing for. She knew that soon, the base would face a crisis that would force them to consider unconventional solutions. Her secret training and hidden skills would finally have a chance to save lives. The stage was set for Sarah to reveal her true identity as a pilot. The alarm bell started ringing at 5:30 in the morning. Sarah jumped out of her bed as the loud sirens echoed through the entire military base. Red lights flashed in the hallways. and soldiers ran in different directions. Everyone knew what this meant. Enemy aircraft were approaching fast. Sarah rushed to the communications center where she was supposed to work. The radio was crackling with urgent messages from scout planes. The reports were worse than anyone had expected. A massive enemy formation was heading straight toward their base and the nearby city. Intelligence counted at least 12 fighter jets and several bombers in the attack group. Colonel Williams burst into the communications room, his face pale with worry. The enemy had chosen the worst possible time to attack. Half of their best pilots were in the hospital recovering from a previous mission that went wrong. 3 more pilots were away on a training exercise that wouldn't return for 2 days. The base had only 4 experienced combat pilots available. "We need every pilot we can get," Colonel Williams shouted to his officers. "Check if any of the trainee pilots are ready for combat. This is not a drill anymore." The young trainee pilots had never faced real enemy fire before. Everyone knew they weren't prepared for such a dangerous mission. Sarah watched the chaos around her while handling emergency radio calls. Her heart was pounding, but not from fear. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The base desperately needed experienced pilots, and she was more prepared than anyone realized. But revealing her secret would be the biggest risk of her life. Tom the mechanic appeared at the door, looking directly at Sarah. He had been preparing her favorite fighter jet for maintenance, but now he realized that plane might be needed for combat. His eyes met Sarah's, and they both understood what the other was thinking. This was Sarah's chance, but she had to act quickly. The communication radio brought more bad news. The enemy formation was flying faster than expected. They would reach the base in less than 30 minutes. There wasn't enough time to call for backup from other military bases. The defense of their base and the nearby city depended entirely on the few pilots they could get in the air immediately. Colonel Williams was getting desperate. The 4 available pilots couldn't handle 12 enemy fighters alone. The trainee pilots were too young and inexperienced. Some had never even fired their weapons in real combat. Sending them against such a large enemy force would be like sending them to die. Sarah made her decision. She stood up from her communication desk and walked directly to Colonel Williams. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steady and clear. "Sir, I request permission to join the combat mission as a pilot." The room fell completely silent. Everyone stopped what they were doing and stared at her. "Officer Chen, this is not the time for jokes," Colonel Williams replied sternly. "We need real pilots, not communication officers who think they can help." But Sarah didn't back down. She looked the colonel straight in the eyes and spoke with confidence that surprised everyone in the room. "Sir, I am a real pilot. I have over 200 hours of flight time in fighter aircraft. I know every system, every weapon, and every combat technique. I've been training in secret for months, and I'm ready for this mission." The colonel's face showed complete shock. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Tom stepped forward to support Sarah's claim. "Colonel, I've been working with Officer Chen during night shifts. She can fly better than most of the men on this base. I've watched her handle emergency situations and weapons training. She's not lying about her skills." Other mechanics nodded in agreement. The colonel was facing an impossible decision. Military regulations clearly stated that women couldn't participate in combat missions. But the enemy would arrive in 20 minutes and he didn't have enough pilots to defend the base. The safety of thousands of soldiers and civilians was at stake. "Even if what you're saying is true," Colonel Williams said slowly, "I cannot authorize a female pilot for combat. The regulations are clear, and I could face serious consequences." Sarah could see that he was struggling with the decision. The practical need for pilots was fighting against years of military tradition. Another urgent radio message interrupted their conversation. Enemy scouts had been spotted just 15 minutes away from the base. The attack was happening faster than anyone had predicted. Time was running out, and every second of delay put more lives in danger. Sarah knew she had to convince the colonel, quickly. "Sir, the regulations were written when there weren't enough male pilots. But today, you don't have enough pilots regardless of the regulations. I'm offering to risk my life to save this base. Isn't that what every soldier is supposed to do?" The room stayed quiet for a few long seconds. Everyone could hear the enemy planes getting closer through the radio reports. Colonel Williams looked around at his officers, then back at Sarah. The weight of his decision would affect everyone on the base. Finally, the colonel spoke. "Officer Chen, if you're lying about your abilities, people will die because of it. Are you absolutely certain you can handle combat against experienced enemy pilots?" Sarah nodded without hesitation. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Colonel Williams looked at his watch. The enemy planes would arrive in 12 minutes. He had no choice left. "Officer Chen, you have permission to fly. But if you get yourself killed, don't blame me." Sarah felt a rush of excitement and terror. At the same time, everything she had trained for was about to become real. Tom ran ahead of Sarah toward the hangar. "Your plane is ready," he called over his shoulder. "I've been keeping her in perfect condition just like you asked." Sarah's fighter jet was a P-51 Mustang, painted in standard military colors but equipped with extra ammunition that Tom had secretly prepared. The other 4 pilots were already running to their aircraft. Captain Rodriguez, the most experienced pilot on the base, stopped when he saw Sarah heading to a fighter jet. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "Communications officers don't fly combat missions." His face showed confusion and anger. "She's flying with us today," Colonel Williams announced over the hangar speakers. "Chen is an experienced pilot and we need every skilled flyer we can get. There's no time for questions or arguments." The other pilots looked shocked, but they focused on preparing their own planes. Sarah reached her aircraft and began the fastest pre-flight check of her life. Her hands moved automatically over every switch and gauge, just like Tom had taught her during those secret night training sessions. The engine started with a powerful roar that filled her with confidence. This was really happening. Through her cockpit radio, Sarah heard the flight leader giving instructions to the team. Enemy formation consists of 12 Messerschmitt fighters and 4 Stuka bombers. They're approaching from the northeast. Our job is to stop them before they reach the base or the city. Stay in formation and watch each other's backs. Sarah's hands gripped the flight controls as her plane taxied toward the runway. She had imagined this moment hundreds of times, but the reality felt different. The weight of responsibility was enormous. Thousands of lives depended on her performance in the next few minutes. There would be no second chances. The 5 fighter planes took off one by one, climbing rapidly into the morning sky. Sarah's aircraft handled perfectly, responding to her every command like an extension of her own body. All those hours of secret practice had prepared her well. She felt completely comfortable in the cockpit. As they gained altitude, Sarah could see the enemy formation approaching in the distance. 12 dark shapes were flying in perfect military formation, with 4 larger bombers protected in the center. They looked professional and dangerous. These weren't inexperienced pilots, they were skilled combat veterans. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. "Enemy aircraft spotted at 2 o'clock, 5 miles out. Everyone stay alert and follow my lead. We'll try to break up their formation and force the bombers to turn back." The other pilots confirmed they understood the plan. Sarah studied the enemy formation through her gun sight. She noticed something the others had missed. The enemy fighters were flying in a classic defensive pattern, but they had left a small gap on the left side. It was probably intentional, a trap to lure attacking planes into crossfire from multiple directions. "Flight leader, this is Chen," Sarah spoke into her radio. "The enemy formation has a weak spot on the left flank, but it looks like a trap. They're probably expecting us to attack there." Captain Rodriguez was surprised to hear such tactical analysis from someone he thought was just a communications officer. "Copy that, Chen. You seem to know enemy tactics pretty well." Rodriguez began adjusting his attack plan based on Sarah's observation. The other pilots were also impressed by her quick analysis of the situation. Maybe this female pilot actually knew what she was doing. The 2 formations were now close enough to see individual aircraft clearly. Sarah could make out the enemy pilots in their cockpits. Her heart was beating fast, but her hands were steady on the controls. All her training and preparation had led to this moment. She was ready to prove that she belonged in combat. "All aircraft, prepare for engagement," Rodriguez commanded. Remember, our primary target is the bombers. If those reach the city, thousands of civilians will die. We have to stop them here." The 5 American fighters spread out into attack formation. The first enemy fighter broke away from the main group and dove toward Captain Rodriguez's plane. Rodriguez turned to meet the attack, and both aircraft began a deadly dance in the sky. Machine gun fire echoed through the air as the 2 pilots tried to get shooting positions on each other. Sarah saw her opportunity. While the enemy fighters were focused on Rodriguez, she could get closer to the bombers. But first, she had to deal with 2 enemy fighters that were turning to intercept her approach. This would be her first real combat test. The lead enemy fighter opened fire when Sarah was still out of effective range. She could see the muzzle flashes from his guns, but the bullets passed harmlessly behind her aircraft. The enemy pilot was either nervous or inexperienced. Sarah used this mistake to her advantage. She pulled her plane into a steep climb, forcing the enemy fighter to follow her upward. At the top of the climb, Sarah executed a perfect Immelman turn that Tom had taught her during their secret training sessions. Now she was behind the enemy plane with a clear shot. Sarah's first burst of machine gun fire hit the enemy fighter's engine. Black smoke poured from the aircraft as it started losing altitude. The enemy pilot tried to turn away, but his damaged plane couldn't maneuver effectively. Sarah fired again, and the enemy fighter exploded in a ball of fire. Her first victory had taken less than 30 seconds. Sarah felt a mixture of triumph and shock. She had just shot down an enemy plane and possibly killed another human being. But there was no time to think about it. More enemy fighters were coming her way, and the real battle was just beginning. 2 more enemy fighters immediately turned toward Sarah's position. They had seen her shoot down their comrade and wanted revenge. Sarah realized she was now the primary target for several enemy pilots. Her success had made her the most dangerous threat in their eyes. The radio crackled with urgent communications from the other American pilots. Captain Rodriguez was engaged in a fierce dogfight with 3 enemy aircraft. Lieutenant Johnson was chasing one of the bombers but had 2 fighters on his tail. The battle was spreading across several miles of sky, and everyone was fighting for their lives. Sarah rolled her aircraft to the right just as machine gun bullets whistled past her cockpit. The enemy pilot had good aim, but Sarah's defensive maneuver saved her life. She pulled back on the control stick, sending her plane into a steep climb that the heavier enemy fighter couldn't match. From her higher altitude, Sarah could see the entire battlefield. The 4 enemy bombers were still flying toward the city, protected by 8 remaining fighters. Her fellow American pilots were outnumbered and struggling to break through the enemy defense. The situation was getting desperate. She spotted Lieutenant Morrison's aircraft trailing smoke from engine damage. He was trying to return to base, but 2 enemy fighters were pursuing him. Morrison's radio calls indicated his engine was failing. If those enemy planes caught up to him, he wouldn't survive. Sarah made a split-second decision. She dove her aircraft straight down at maximum speed, aiming for the 2 fighters chasing Morrison. The wind screamed past her cockpit as her plane accelerated toward the enemy. This was an extremely dangerous maneuver that could tear her aircraft apart. Her sudden appearance surprised the enemy pilots. Sarah fired a long burst from her machine guns, hitting the rear enemy fighter in the fuel tank. The aircraft exploded instantly, sending debris flying in all directions. Sarah had to swerve sharply to avoid the wreckage. The second enemy fighter turned to face Sarah's attack. Both pilots fired at each other at almost the same time. Sarah felt her plane shudder as several bullets hit her wings, but her shots were more accurate. The enemy fighter's cockpit was hit, and the plane spun out of control toward the ground. "Thanks, Chen." Morrison's voice came over the radio. "You just saved my life. I owe you one." Sarah had now shot down 3 enemy fighters in less than 5 minutes. Even the experienced pilots on her team were amazed by her skill and courage. But the main threat was still approaching the city. The 4 enemy bombers had used the confusion of the dogfights to get closer to their target. If they reached the populated areas, their bombs would kill thousands of innocent people. Sarah knew she had to stop them. She pushed her damaged aircraft to maximum speed, racing to intercept the bombers before they could complete their mission. The enemy fighters that were supposed to protect the bombers had been drawn into individual combat with the American pilots. This gave Sarah a brief opportunity to attack the bombers directly. The lead bomber was now only 2 miles from the city limits. Sarah could see the bomb bay doors starting to open. In less than 1 minute, those bombs would be falling on schools, hospitals, and homes full of families. She had to act immediately, even though attacking 4 bombers alone was almost suicide. Sarah approached the bomber formation from below, where their gunners had limited visibility. She climbed rapidly until she was directly underneath the lead bomber. From this position, she could see the aircraft's most vulnerable spots that Tom had taught her about during their maintenance sessions. Her first attack run damaged the lead bomber's left engine. The heavy aircraft began losing altitude and couldn't maintain formation with the other bombers. But the bomber's gunners had spotted Sarah and were firing at her aircraft. Tracer bullets streaked past her cockpit as she maneuvered to avoid being hit. The second bomber pilot tried to ram Sarah's fighter with his much larger aircraft. Sarah barely escaped by rolling to the left at the last second. The bomber's wing passed just inches from her cockpit. She could see the enemy pilot's face clearly as the massive aircraft swept past her. Sarah's ammunition was running low after the previous dogfights. She had enough bullets for maybe 2 more attack runs. Every shot had to count if she wanted to stop the remaining bombers from reaching their target. The pressure was enormous, but Sarah felt completely calm and focused. She positioned her aircraft for a perfect attack angle on the second bomber. This time she aimed for the cockpit area where the pilot and navigator were sitting. Her burst of machine gun fire shattered the bomber's front windows and hit both crew members. The aircraft immediately went into a steep dive. 2 bombers down, 2 still flying toward the city. Sarah's aircraft had taken several hits from defensive gunners, and one of her engines was starting to smoke. Warning lights were flashing on. Her instrument panel. She might not be able to continue fighting much longer. The third bomber was now less than 1 mile from the city. Sarah could see people on the ground pointing up at the approaching aircraft. Some were running for shelter, but most didn't realize how much danger they were in. Children were playing in the streets, completely unaware that death was approaching from above. Sarah pushed her damaged aircraft beyond its normal limits. Black smoke was pouring from her engine, but she ignored the warning signals. Nothing mattered except stopping those bombs from falling on innocent people. She had one chance left to save the city. Sarah's damaged fighter plane was barely staying in the air. Her engine was overheating and oil was spraying across her windscreen. But she could see the third enemy bomber opening its bomb bay doors directly over the city center. Hundreds of people were visible on the streets below, completely unaware of the danger above them. With her remaining ammunition, Sarah fired at the bomber's bomb release mechanism. Her shots were perfect, jamming the doors in a half-open position. The bombs couldn't be dropped accurately, and some fell harmlessly into empty fields outside the city. But the bomber was still flying and trying to complete its mission. The fourth and final bomber had circled around to make a second approach to the city. This pilot was more experienced and cautious than the others. He was flying at a higher altitude where Sarah's damaged aircraft would have trouble reaching him. The situation seemed hopeless. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. "Chen, your plane is on fire. You need to bail out immediately." Sarah looked back and saw flames coming from her engine. Her aircraft was dying around her, but she couldn't abandon her mission now. Too many lives depended on stopping that last bomber. Instead of ejecting, Sarah used her aircraft's remaining power to climb toward the high-flying bomber. The flames were getting worse and her controls were becoming harder to operate. She had maybe 2 minutes before her plane would explode or crash. This had to be her final attack. The enemy bomber pilot saw Sarah's burning aircraft approaching and tried to escape. But his heavy bomber couldn't outrun even a damaged fighter plane. Sarah positioned herself for one last attack, knowing that this would probably cost her own life. Her ammunition was completely gone, so she would have to find another way to stop the bomber. Tom's voice suddenly came over the emergency radio frequency. "Sarah, if you can hear this, aim for the bomber's fuel lines near the wing roots. One small spark will ignite everything." Tom was watching the battle from the base and trying to help her from the ground. Sarah's aircraft was now completely on fire, but she managed to get close enough to the bomber for one final maneuver. Instead of shooting, she used her burning plane as a weapon. She rammed her fighter's wing into the bomber's fuel tank area, exactly where Tom had suggested. The explosion was massive. Both aircraft were destroyed instantly in a ball of fire that could be seen for miles. Sarah had sacrificed her life to save the city, but at the last second she managed to eject from her cockpit. Her parachute opened just in time, and she drifted down toward the city she had just saved. Meanwhile, the other American pilots had been winning their individual battles. Captain Rodriguez had shot down 2 more enemy fighters, and Lieutenant Johnson had destroyed another. The remaining enemy aircraft were retreating back toward their own territory. The attack had been completely defeated, but nobody on the ground knew that the battle had been won by a woman pilot. Sarah landed in a small park, where dozens of people had gathered to watch the air battle. They helped her out of her parachute gear, amazed that such a young person had been involved in the fighting above their heads. "Are you one of our pilots?" an old man asked Sarah. She was still wearing her flight helmet and goggles, so he couldn't see her face clearly. Sarah nodded but didn't say anything. She was exhausted from the battle and still processing what had just happened. A small girl approached Sarah and handed her a flower. "Thank you for protecting us," the child said simply. Sarah knelt down and accepted the flower, realizing that this was why she had risked everything. These innocent people deserved to live in safety, regardless of military regulations about female pilots. The radio in Sarah's survival gear was broadcasting messages from the base. Colonel Williams was trying to contact all the pilots to confirm their status. "All aircraft report in. We need to know who made it through the battle." Sarah could hear the relief and concern in his voice. Captain Rodriguez was the first to respond. "Rodriguez here, returning to base with minor damage. Johnson is with me, also safe." Then there was a pause as everyone waited to hear from the other pilots. Lieutenant Morrison had made it back earlier with engine problems, so that left only Sarah unaccounted for. "This is Chen," Sarah finally spoke into her radio. "Aircraft destroyed but pilot safe. I'm on the ground in the city center." The radio went completely silent for several seconds. Everyone at the base had assumed that Sarah died in the explosion they witnessed from miles away. "Chen, you're alive?" Colonel Williams sounded amazed. "We saw your plane explode when you hit that bomber. How did you survive?" Sarah explained about her last-second ejection and parachute landing. The entire base erupted in cheers when they realized their secret female pilot had survived. Tom's voice came over the radio, filled with emotion. "Sarah, you did it. You shot down 6 enemy aircraft and saved the city. Nobody can deny your abilities. Now." The other mechanics and ground crew were celebrating at the base, proud of the pilot they had helped train in secret. But Sarah's thoughts were focused on the bigger picture. In just 20 minutes of combat, she had proven that women could be just as effective as men in dangerous military roles. Her actions had saved thousands of lives and changed the way everyone thought about female pilots. As military vehicles arrived to pick up Sarah from the city, crowds of grateful civilians gathered around her. Word was spreading quickly that one of the pilots who saved their city was actually a woman. Children were asking for her autograph, and adults were shaking her hand with tears in their eyes. The military jeep carrying Sarah back to the base was surrounded by crowds of people wanting to thank her. News reporters had already arrived in the city, having heard rumors about a female pilot who single-handedly stopped an enemy bombing attack. Sarah tried to avoid the cameras, but her story was too extraordinary to keep secret. When Sarah arrived at the base, she found hundreds of soldiers waiting for her. Even the pilots who had initially doubted her abilities were now showing her the highest respect. Captain Rodriguez approached her with a serious expression on his face. "Chen, I owe you an apology. You're one of the finest combat pilots I've ever seen." Colonel Williams called Sarah into his office for a private meeting. His attitude had completely changed since the morning when he reluctantly gave her permission to fly. "Officer Chen, what you did today was incredible, but we have a problem. Military headquarters is demanding a full explanation of how a communications officer ended up flying combat missions." Sarah sat down and told Colonel Williams the complete truth about her secret training. She explained how Tom had helped her learn aircraft maintenance and how she had studied enemy tactics in her spare time. She admitted to practicing with fighter planes during night shifts when everyone else was sleeping. You violated numerous military regulations, Colonel Williams said seriously. Under normal circumstances, you would face court-martial and imprisonment. Sarah nodded, understanding that her actions had consequences beyond the successful mission. She had broken rules that existed for reasons the military considered important. But then Colonel Williams smiled for the first time since Sarah had known him. However, your actions today saved this base and the entire city. Military headquarters has decided to overlook the regulation violations. Instead, you're being promoted to the rank of lieutenant and transferred to the official combat pilot program. Tom knocked on the office door and entered with a huge grin on his face. Sarah, there are reporters outside who want to interview the female pilot who shot down 6 enemy planes. This story is going to be in newspapers across the entire country. Sarah realized that her secret was now public knowledge. The news interviews were unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Reporters asked her hundreds of questions about her training, her motivations, and her feelings during combat. They wanted to know how a woman had managed to outfight experienced male enemy pilots. Sarah answered honestly but humbly. I didn't do anything that any other pilot couldn't have done, Sarah told the reporters. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right training. The real heroes are all the people who supported me and believed in my abilities when nobody else would. Within days, Sarah's story was front-page news in newspapers from New York to California. Radio stations broadcast interviews with her across the nation. Hollywood studios contacted her about making a movie based on her experiences. Sarah had become the most famous female pilot in America overnight. But the attention brought both positive and negative reactions. Many people celebrated Sarah as a hero who proved that women could serve in combat roles just as effectively as men. Others criticized her for breaking military traditions and argued that she had set a dangerous precedent for other women. Military leaders from other countries requested meetings with Sarah to learn about her training methods and combat techniques. The story of her 20-minute battle against 12 enemy aircraft became a case study in flight schools around the world. Young female pilots everywhere saw Sarah as proof that their dreams were possible. Sarah continued flying combat missions for the rest of the war. She shot down 14 more enemy aircraft over the next 2 years, making her one of the most successful pilots of her generation. But she never forgot that her greatest achievement was proving that courage and skill weren't limited by gender. After the war ended, Sarah became a test pilot for experimental aircraft. She helped develop new technologies that made flying safer for future generations of pilots. She also established a flight training school specifically for women who wanted to pursue military or civilian aviation careers. Years later, Sarah would often visit schools to talk to young girls about following their dreams despite obstacles and doubts from others. She would tell them that the most important qualities for success were determination, preparation, and the courage to take action when opportunities arose. Tom remained Sarah's closest friend and advisor throughout her career. He eventually became the head maintenance supervisor at a major Air Force base, always proud of his role in training the woman who changed military aviation forever. He kept a photograph of Sarah's first fighter plane in his office until the day he retired. The city that Sarah saved during that crucial 20-minute battle erected a monument in her honor. Every year on the anniversary of the air battle, local schools organize ceremonies where children learn about courage, equality, and the importance of judging people by their abilities rather than their gender. Sarah's story became a symbol of how individual actions can challenge unfair systems and create opportunities for future generations. She proved that when society's rules prevent capable people from contributing their talents, everyone suffers. Her legacy inspired changes in military policies that opened combat roles to women decades earlier than might have otherwise happened. Today, female pilots serve in air forces around the world, flying the most advanced aircraft ever built. Many of them trace their opportunities back to Sarah Chen, the communications officer, who secretly trained to become a pilot and then saved a city by shooting down 6 enemy planes in just 20 minutes of combat that changed history forever.